The shrill alarm pierced the quiet morning as Natalie fumbled to silence it, her eyes heavy from another night of restless sleep. Beside her, little Emma stirred beneath the worn blankets, her small frame curled against the wall of their one-bedroom apartment in the less glamorous part of New York. "Mommy, are we late again?" Emma whispered, her innocent eyes blinking away sleep as Natalie hustled around their tiny kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast of toast and juice. The eviction notice on their refrigerator seemed to glare at her, a constant reminder of how precariously their lives balanced on the edge. Natalie's fingers trembled as she buttoned her waitress uniform, mentally calculating if her tips would cover both the electric bill and Emma's asthma medication this month. The restaurant manager's warning from yesterday echoed in her mind. One more late arrival, and she'd lose the only steady income keeping their heads above water. The daycare center wouldn't open for another 30 minutes, but Natalie couldn't afford to be late again, not with Mr. Prescott's zero-tolerance policy hanging over her head. She bundled Emma into her warmest coat, despite the spring morning, the little girl's medication clutched tightly in her hand. "We'll make it on time today, sweetie, I promise," Natalie assured her daughter, though the city bus schedule seemed determined to prove her wrong. Emma's small hand in hers was the only warmth against the cool morning air and the chill of mounting anxiety. The bus finally arrived, already crowded with the morning commuters heading toward Manhattan's glittering skyscrapers. Natalie lifted Emma onto the last available seat, gripping the overhead rail as the bus lurched forward into the congested New York traffic. Emma clutched her worn teddy bear, a gift from her absent father before he disappeared from their lives 3 years ago. The faded brown fur held memories of better times, when their apartment had been filled with laughter instead of the constant worry that now lined Natalie's young face. An elderly man offered Natalie his seat, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he nodded toward Emma. "You look like you could use a break, dear," he said, the small kindness momentarily catching Natalie off guard in a city known for its indifference rather than its compassion. Natalie scrolled through job listings on her phone during the ride, bookmarking positions that might offer better hours or healthcare benefits. The waitressing job had been a desperate choice after her nursing program had been interrupted by Emma's premature birth and the staggering medical bills that followed. The bus driver announced a detour due to construction, adding precious minutes to their commute as Natalie checked her watch with growing anxiety. Emma sensed her mother's stress, reaching up to pat her arm with small fingers sticky from the half-eaten toast they'd rushed through at breakfast. Mrs. Chen greeted them with understanding eyes when they arrived, taking Emma's hand while discreetly slipping Natalie a paper bag. "For later," she whispered with a gentle smile, the small kindness nearly bringing tears to Natalie's exhausted eyes. Natalie checked her watch as she rushed toward the subway station, calculating she had exactly 17 minutes to make it to Le Bistro before her shift began. The restaurant catered to New York's elite, people who spent more on a single meal than she earned in a week of double shifts. She was only 2 blocks from the restaurant when she heard the screech of tires and a sickening thud, followed by panicked shouts from the gathering crowd. Against her better judgment, Natalie slowed her pace, her nursing school training from years ago, before Emma, before life had derailed her plans, kicking in automatically. A man lay sprawled on the asphalt, blood seeping through his expensive tailored suit, where a jagged piece of metal had torn through the fabric. The driver who had hit him was nowhere to be seen, and bystanders merely stood filming with their phones instead of offering help. "I'm calling 911, Natalie announced, kneeling beside the injured man whose piercing blue eyes locked onto hers with startling clarity despite his obvious pain. His hand gripped her wrist with surprising strength, stopping her from reaching for her phone. "No police, no ambulance," he commanded through gritted teeth, his voice carrying an authority that made several onlookers step back. "Help me to that black car at the corner, and you'll be compensated for your trouble." Natalie hesitated, torn between her instinct to get proper medical help and the desperation in the man's eyes. The ticking clock reminded her that every second spent here pushed her closer to unemployment, yet she couldn't bring herself to abandon someone in need. "You need a hospital," she insisted, pressing her scarf against his wound to slow the bleeding, noticing how his expression flickered between pain and something darker, more calculating. The expensive watch on his wrist probably cost more than 6 months of her rent. The man's driver appeared from nowhere, his imposing frame blocking the curious onlookers, as he helped Natalie load his boss into the backseat of a vehicle that screamed wealth and power. "The address," the injured man muttered, slipping a business card into her palm before losing consciousness. 40 minutes later, Natalie stood trembling before Mr. Prescott, his face flushed with anger as he pointed to the clock showing she was nearly an hour late. Her uniform was stained with blood, her explanation falling on deaf ears as customers watched the scene unfold with uncomfortable fascination. "I don't pay you for heroics. I pay you to serve tables on time," Mr. Prescott sneered, snatching her name tag from her shirt with such force that the pin scratched her skin. "Clear out your locker and don't expect a reference. Some bleeding heart charity might hire you." The subway ride home was a blur of panic and tears as Natalie clutched her final paycheck, knowing it wouldn't cover next week's rent. Emma's medication would empty the last of their savings, and the job market was brutal for a college dropout with a spotty employment history. Natalie's hands shook as she unlocked their apartment door, the weight of her decision to help a stranger crushing her under its consequences. The business card she'd forgotten about fell from her pocket as she emptied her uniform, revealing an address in the most exclusive part of Manhattan. Mrs. Chen called shortly after they arrived home, offering to watch Emma for free until Natalie found another job. "My daughter was single mother too," she explained in her accented English, the generosity bringing fresh tears to Natalie's eyes as she thanked the woman who had become a surrogate grandmother to Emma. Natalie's phone buzzed with text messages from her coworkers expressing outrage at her treatment, some offering to speak to friends at other restaurants about potential openings. The solidarity was unexpected but desperately needed as she calculated how long their meager savings would last. Sleep eluded Natalie that night as she researched Alexander Price online, discovering a carefully crafted public image of a legitimate businessman with philanthropic tendencies. Beneath the polished exterior, however, lurked rumors of connections to organized crime and unexplained disappearances of business rivals. The morning paper featured a small article about an unidentified hit-and-run victim in the financial district, with police seeking witnesses. Natalie's stomach clenched as she recognized the intersection where she'd helped Alexander. The incident sanitized into 3 impersonal sentences that made no mention of the blood she still couldn't fully scrub from beneath her fingernails. "Princeton Towers penthouse," she read aloud, wondering what kind of man lived in such luxury while bleeding on a street corner, refusing medical attention. The card felt heavy in her hand, embossed with a simple insignia that seemed vaguely familiar from newspaper headlines. That night, after tucking Emma into bed with promises that everything would be okay, Natalie researched the address online, her blood running cold as articles appeared linking the building to rumors of organized crime. The penthouse owner was reportedly one Alexander Price, whose investment firm was suspected of laundering money for less savory enterprises. The next morning, desperation drove Natalie to the gleaming tower, her resume clutched in one hand, and Emma's small fingers wrapped around the other. The security guards exchanged meaningful glances when she mentioned Alexander Price had given her his card, their demeanor shifting from dismissive to cautiously respectful. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like ascending to another world, one where gold accents and marble floors replaced chipped linoleum and peeling wallpaper. Emma's eyes widened at the opulence, her natural curiosity temporarily overwhelming her shyness as she whispered, "Is this where a prince lives, Mommy?" A woman with steel-gray hair and a sharper suit met them at the penthouse entrance, her assessing gaze softening slightly at the sight of Emma. "Mr. Price has been expecting you, though not with the child," she stated, her tone making it clear this was an unusual occurrence in their strictly professional environment. Alexander Price sat behind a massive desk, his athletic frame belying the injury Natalie knew was hidden beneath his impeccably tailored shirt. His eyes, cold and calculating, studied her with unsettling intensity as his assistant ushered them into the office that overlooked the entire city. "The waitress who chose helping me over keeping her job," he stated, his voice carrying no question, only certainty as he gestured for them to sit in chairs worth more than Natalie's monthly rent. "And this must be the reason you couldn't afford to lose that job." Natalie straightened her spine, one hand protectively on Emma's shoulder as she met his gaze without flinching. "I'm here because you said there would be compensation, and I'm now unemployed with a daughter to support." A hint of something, respect perhaps, flickered across Alexander's face as he observed her directness. "Most people who know who I am wouldn't have the courage to make demands," he remarked, pressing a button that summoned his assistant with a folder of documents. "I'm offering you a position as my personal assistant," Alexander stated, sliding the contract across the polished desk surface as if offering her salvation rather than employment. "The salary is 10 times what you made at that restaurant, with healthcare benefits that will cover your daughter's condition." The figures on the page made Natalie's head swim, the comma in the salary amount falling in a place she'd never seen in her own finances before. "What exactly would this job entail?" she asked cautiously, years of hardship having taught her that nothing this good came without strings attached. Officially, managing my schedule, coordinating with business partners, and ensuring my household runs smoothly, Alexander replied, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. Unofficially, being someone I can trust implicitly, which is a rare commodity in my world. Emma tugged at Natalie's sleeve, whispering loud enough for Alexander to hear. He has the same scary eyes as the wolf in my storybook. The innocent observation brought an unexpected smile to the man's lips, transforming his severe features into something almost approachable. Smart kid, Alexander commented, leaning forward slightly despite the pain it clearly caused him. The world is full of wolves, Ms. Natalie, but some of us can also be loyal to our pack when someone proves their worth. The assistant returned with another woman who introduced herself as the head of household staff, offering to show Emma the rooftop garden while the adults sorted out the boring paperwork. Natalie hesitated, her protective instincts flaring, but Emma's excitement was palpable. There are security cameras everywhere, and my staff knows their lives depend on that child's safety, Alexander stated quietly after Emma left, his tone leaving no doubt about the seriousness of his words. Now, shall we discuss the real reason I've brought you here? I need someone who sees me as human first, not as a target or a meal ticket, Alexander explained, running a hand through his dark hair as he leaned back in his chair. Someone who would help a bleeding man on the street without knowing his net worth. 2 weeks into her new position, Natalie had already witnessed 3 meetings that blurred the line between aggressive business tactics and outright intimidation. Her desk outside Alexander's office gave her a front-row seat to New York's shadow economy, where handshakes sealed deals that contracts never would. The penthouse became Natalie and Emma's new home, a spacious guest suite transformed into a fairy tale bedroom for the wide-eyed child who still didn't understand why men with subtle bulges under their jackets stood guard in the hallways. Alexander insisted it was safer than commuting from their old neighborhood, but Natalie suspected he preferred keeping them close. Emma's asthma improved dramatically with the proper medication and care from the private physician Alexander had arranged without being asked. The little girl's laughter echoed through rooms previously filled only with tense business discussions and the occasional veiled threat. "Mr. Price doesn't smile like that with anyone else," whispered Rebecca, the housekeeper who had taken a motherly interest in Natalie's adjustment to their strange new reality. Not since his brother disappeared last year after the territory disputes with the West Side crews. Natalie developed a system for Alexander's visitors, business associates on Mondays, city officials seeking contributions on Tuesdays, and the intimidating men who spoke in hushed codes on Fridays when Emma had art classes in the building's private studio. The patterns emerged like constellations in a sky she was only beginning to navigate. Alexander's wound healed, revealing a map of older scars that told stories his carefully maintained public persona never would. Natalie caught glimpses of these histories when he rolled up his sleeves during late-night strategy sessions, his guard lowering slightly as midnight stretched toward morning. The first gala they attended together sent whispers rippling through New York's elite circles, Alexander Price arriving with his stunning new assistant rather than his usual parade of interchangeable models. Natalie's simple black dress, a rushed purchase from a department store, stood out among designer gowns like a declaration of authenticity. "Dance with me," Alexander commanded softly, his hand extended as suspicious eyes tracked their movement toward the center of the ballroom. The orchestra's melody wrapped around them like a protective cloak as he guided her with surprising gentleness, his usual tension momentarily subdued. His enemies watched from the edges of the room, calculating this unexpected development in the life of a man known for keeping everyone at arm's length. Natalie felt the weight of their speculative gazes, but found herself more concerned with the unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest as Alexander's hand rested protectively against her lower back. "They think you're my weakness now," he murmured against her ear as they swayed to the music, the warning clear beneath his words. "But they don't understand that the right kind of vulnerability can be the greatest strength." That night, returning to the penthouse with Emma asleep in the car, Alexander received a phone call that transformed his expression from relaxed to glacial in seconds. The glimpse of the man beneath the power had vanished, replaced by the calculating strategist whose name inspired fear across the city's underworld. The next morning, Natalie found a jewelry box on her desk, containing a delicate pendant with a tiny tracking device embedded in its design. The accompanying note read simply, "Protection has its price. Never take this off." Her fingers trembled as she fastened it around her neck, the cold metal warming against her skin like a promise, or a chain. 2 men arrived that afternoon with bloodied knuckles and victorious grins. receiving Alexander's subtle nod of approval before disappearing into his private study. Natalie intercepted the whiskey and first aid kit they requested, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "You're wondering if you've made a terrible mistake," Alexander stated later that evening as they reviewed his schedule, his perceptive gaze catching the doubt in her eyes. "But remember, the world you left behind was just as dangerous, only there you had no protection." The truth unfolded gradually, like a photo developing in darkroom chemicals, revealing the full picture of Alexander's empire one shadow at a time. The investment firm was legitimate on paper, but its primary function was laundering money from operations that controlled half of New York's underground economy. Natalie discovered the extent of his influence when a police officer pulled her over for a minor traffic violation, then immediately apologized and let her go upon seeing the special license plate on the company car. The officer's fear had been palpable, his hands visibly trembling as he backed away. "Emma asks why people are afraid of you," Natalie confronted Alexander that evening, standing in the doorway of his home office where he sat reviewing financial reports with his most trusted accountant. The question hung between them, demanding truth rather than the carefully crafted explanations he typically offered. The accountant excused himself with practiced discretion as Alexander set aside his papers, gesturing for Natalie to close the door. "People fear what they don't understand," he began, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "and what I've built is deliberately difficult to comprehend." Records of charitable donations appeared on Natalie's desk the next morning. Anonymous contributions to hospitals, scholarship funds for children from low-income neighborhoods, and rehabilitation programs for former inmates. The amounts were staggering, all traceable to shell companies connected to Alexander's organization. "My father believed power existed only to serve itself," Alexander explained when she questioned these contradictions, his expression hardening at the mention of his predecessor. "I learned from his mistakes. True strength comes from building a community that thrives because of your protection, not despite your exploitation." Emma's school called one afternoon about a man claiming to be her uncle, attempting to pick her up, triggering Alexander's security team into immediate action. Within hours, the stranger had been identified as a scout for a rival organization seeking leverage against the Price Empire. "They will never touch her," Alexander vowed, his voice deadly calm as he issued orders that Natalie pretended not to hear. Orders that would ensure the threat was permanently neutralized. That night, he installed additional security measures throughout the building and assigned a personal bodyguard to shadow Emma during school hours. Natalie found herself caught between gratitude for his protection and horror at the methods he employed to maintain it, her moral compass spinning wildly as she navigated this gray world where right and wrong blurred beyond recognition. Her nursing training had taught her to heal, not to weigh the value of human lives against one another. "You're the heart in a heartless business," Alexander told her late one night when he found her staring out over the city lights, troubled by the day's events involving a competing family whose business had been forcibly acquired by Alexander's associates. "The conscience I sometimes need to be reminded of. The revelation that changed everything came unexpectedly through Emma, who innocently mentioned that Alexander kept a photo of her real father in his desk drawer. Natalie's confusion turned to shock when her daughter described the military uniform and the medal that matched the one in their family's keepsake box. "Your husband didn't die in a random shooting," Alexander admitted when confronted, his composure momentarily fracturing under the weight of the truth. "He witnessed something he shouldn't have during his security detail at a downtown hotel, and my father made an example of him." The ground seemed to tilt beneath Natalie's feet as past and present collided, her grief reopening like a wound that had never truly healed. "You knew who I was from the beginning," she whispered, remembering how Alexander had emphasized Emma's asthma condition before she'd ever mentioned it. Alexander's silence was confirmation enough, his calculating eyes watching as she processed this revelation. "I've spent 5 years dismantling my father's legacy of needless cruelty," he finally said, his voice uncharacteristically raw, "starting with finding you and your daughter to make amends the only way I know how." The next morning, divorce papers arrived for a marriage Natalie had never entered, along with documents transferring ownership of their apartment building to Emma's name through a blind trust. The apartment they'd left behind had been completely renovated, the eviction notice replaced with a deed bearing Natalie's name. Emma's 7th birthday celebration transformed the austere penthouse into a child's wonderland, with Alexander's imposing security team awkwardly wearing party hats as they guarded perimeters strung with princess decorations. The sight of hardened enforcers helping with balloon animals revealed a humanity Natalie hadn't expected to find in this world. "You've changed him," confided Peter, Alexander's right-hand man who had initially viewed Natalie with open suspicion. The organization runs on respect rather than fear now, and our territories have actually expanded because of it. The birthday cake was wheeled in, a spectacular castle creation from the city's most exclusive bakery, when the first gunshot shattered the penthouse window. Alexander moved with practiced efficiency, covering Emma with his body as security teams mobilized around them in a choreographed defense pattern. "Get them to the panic room," Alexander ordered, his voice deadly calm, as he pressed a hidden panel revealing a sleek handgun concealed within a bookshelf. The celebration dissolved into chaos, as armed men entered through service entrances, betraying the involvement of someone familiar with the building's security protocols. Natalie clutched Emma against her chest as they were hustled through a hidden passage behind the kitchen pantry, the little girl's birthday dress spotted with frosting and tears. The steel door sealed behind them with a definitive hiss, cutting off the sounds of conflict echoing through the home they had begun to consider their own. Hours passed in the windowless safe room, its military-grade monitors displaying security feeds from throughout the building where Alexander's men had neutralized the immediate threat. Natalie watched with conflicted emotions as Alexander himself interrogated a captured attacker, his methods efficient and merciless. "The Donovan family sends their regards," sneered the bloodied man on the screen, revealing the orchestrators behind the attack. Longtime rivals who had interpreted Alexander's recent legitimate business ventures as a sign of weakness. "You've gone soft, Price, playing house with your charity case." Emma slept fitfully on the small cot, exhausted from fear and confusion, while Natalie witnessed Alexander's two worlds colliding violently on the monitors before her. The civilized businessman disappeared entirely, replaced by a strategic warrior whose calculated violence served a singular purpose, protecting what was his. When the door finally opened, Alexander stood before them with a cut above his eye and blood on his shirt collar that wasn't his own. "It's over," he stated simply, his eyes seeking reassurance that they were unharmed before the hardness in them softened slightly. "You need to leave," he continued as he escorted them back through the penthouse where his men were efficiently removing all evidence of the attack. "My associate is waiting with a car to take you to our property in Connecticut until I've resolved the situation permanently." Natalie hesitated, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd witnessed and the realization that their presence in Alexander's life had catalyzed this violence. "This is because of us," she whispered, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. "This was inevitable," Alexander corrected, his thumb gently wiping a tear from Emma's cheek as he knelt to her level. "But they chose the wrong day and the wrong target, which means they've forfeited any chance of mercy." The country estate was a fortress disguised as a pastoral retreat, its perimeter secured by technologies that seemed borrowed from military installations rather than residential security systems. Alexander's staff had prepared for their arrival with meticulous attention to detail, from Emma's favorite snacks to Natalie's preferred tea blend. "He's always been prepared for this," explained the estate manager, a retired Special Forces operative whose gentle manner with Emma belied his lethal capabilities. "The contingency plans for your protection were among the first protocols Mr. Price established after you entered his employ." That night, as Emma finally slept surrounded by unfamiliar luxury, Natalie stood on the balcony overlooking manicured grounds that hid tactical advantages within their beautiful design. The cool metal of Alexander's tracking pendant pressed against her collarbone, no longer feeling like a chain, but rather a lifeline, connecting her to a man whose contradictions had somehow become essential to her world. 3 days into their countryside exile, Natalie discovered a hidden security system built into the estate's walls, revealing footage of Alexander's brutal retaliation against the Donovan family. The attacks had been swift and calculated, eliminating key players while securing vulnerable territories in a single night of coordinated strikes. "He's dismantling their entire operation," Peter explained during his daily security briefing, his expression revealing both respect and apprehension. "Boss doesn't just defeat enemies. He erases them completely so no one ever tries the same thing again." Emma had adapted to their temporary home with the resilience only children possess, delighting in the sprawling gardens and friendly security personnel who indulged her endless questions. She seemed blissfully unaware of the violence that had necessitated their sudden relocation, focusing instead on the discovery of a piano in the East Wing. The estate manager delivered fresh intelligence each morning, coded updates on Alexander's methodical destruction of his rivals, the strategic acquisition of their assets, and the calculated messages being sent to other families who might consider similar attacks. These clinical reports contrasted sharply with the tender voice messages Alexander left for Emma each night. "Tell my little princess I'm handling some boring business meetings," he would instruct Natalie, his tone softening whenever he mentioned the child who had somehow breached his carefully constructed walls. The same man who ordered executions was sending stuffed animals via private courier to a 7-year-old girl. On the 5th day, Natalie intercepted a call not meant for her ears, Alexander's second-in-command discussing a federal investigation that had launched in response to the recent violence. The phrase "confidential informant" stood out clearly, followed by speculation about who might have betrayed the Price organization. That evening, Alexander arrived unexpectedly, his tailored suit replaced by casual attire that somehow made him appear more approachable and less like the calculating businessman who had offered her employment. His shoulders carried visible tension as he embraced Emma, who squealed with delight at his surprise appearance. "We need to talk," he told Natalie after Emma had finally been convinced to go to bed, pulling her into his private study where soundproofing ensured complete privacy. The warmth in his eyes from earlier had vanished, replaced by the cold calculation that had built his empire. Alexander poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one toward her as he pulled up security footage on his tablet. "Someone close to me is feeding information to the feds," he stated flatly, studying her reaction with unsettling intensity. "Someone who suddenly gained access to my inner circle within the last few months." Natalie's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. She was being accused of betrayal by the man who had systematically inserted himself into every aspect of her life. "You think I'm an informant?" she whispered, genuine hurt mingling with indignation as she pushed the untouched whiskey away. "I think the timing is suspicious," Alexander replied evenly, scrolling through photographs of her entering the federal building downtown 3 weeks earlier. The images showed her clearly, time-stamped during her lunch break on a Tuesday, the day she had applied for Emma's passport. "I was getting Emma's passport for our trip to visit my mother," Natalie explained, reaching for her phone to show the confirmation email, only to find Alexander already holding it. The violation of privacy should have angered her, but instead, she felt a hollow disappointment that after everything, trust remained so fragile between them. The study door burst open before either could speak further, Peter appearing with an urgency that immediately commanded Alexander's attention. "We found the leak," he announced, sliding a tablet across the desk showing surveillance footage of Rebecca, the motherly housekeeper, meeting with an unmarked federal vehicle in a shopping mall parking garage. Peter's team had discovered encrypted communications hidden in Rebecca's personal devices, revealing a year-long operation targeting Alexander's organization. "She's been with us for 3 years, Alexander noted, his voice dangerously quiet as he studied the evidence. "Since before my father died." The betrayal cut deeper because Rebecca had been one of the few staff members Alexander had personally vouched for, someone he had protected during the transition of power. "She was like family," he admitted, a rare glimpse of vulnerability crossing his features before hardening into resolve. Dawn broke with Rebecca's arrest, Alexander's men intercepting her before she could reach her federal handlers with the latest intelligence gathered from her position within the household. Natalie watched from an upstairs window as the woman was escorted into a waiting vehicle, her face remarkably calm for someone whose cover had been blown. "What will happen to her?" Natalie asked when Alexander joined her, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it from him directly. The organization's standard response to betrayal was well established, yet she searched his expression for any indication that Rebecca might be spared. Alexander's silence spoke volumes, his jaw tightening as he considered his response carefully. "She'll be given a choice, cooperation or consequences," he finally answered, avoiding specifics in a rare concession to Natalie's sensibilities. "But she won't disappear like others have." Emma's laughter floated up from the garden where she played under the watchful eyes of security personnel, her innocence a stark contrast to the moral complexities unfolding around her. "She sees something in you that I've been trying to find," Natalie observed quietly, watching Alexander's expression soften as he gazed at the child. "I never intended to care about either of you," Alexander admitted, the confession clearly difficult for a man unaccustomed to acknowledging emotional vulnerabilities. "You were meant to be an asset, a way to balance my ledger for past sins, not people who would matter to me." That evening, Alexander received news that federal agents had raided 3 of his legitimate businesses, seizing computers and financial records despite Rebecca's capture. They already had enough to move forward, he realized, frustration evident as he paced the study like a caged predator. This is just the beginning. Natalie found him hours later studying old photographs, his father standing beside military officials, handshakes with politicians, trophy hunts in exotic locations. He built an empire through fear and brutality, Alexander explained, his voice uncharacteristically reflective. I inherited his methods along with his enemies. You've been systematically dismantling his approach since you took over, Natalie observed, finally understanding the pattern behind Alexander's seemingly contradictory business decisions over the past years. The legitimate investments, the community programs, the reduced violence. You're trying to transform his organization. Alexander's law team arrived before dawn, bringing news both concerning and promising. The federal investigation had significant evidence of historical crimes, but was struggling to connect current operations to illegal activities. The gradual shift toward legitimacy had created legal firewalls that might actually protect the organization's future. They're offering a deal, Alexander revealed after the lawyers departed. His expression conflicted as he outlined the terms. Immunity for information on my father's old partners, substantial financial penalties, and my complete withdrawal from certain territories in exchange for avoiding prosecution. For the first time since she'd known him, indecision clouded Alexander's usually decisive demeanor as he weighed options that would have been unthinkable months earlier. My father would rather die than compromise, he mused, staring at the federal proposal spread across his desk. He'd see this as weakness. And what do you see it as? Natalie asked, carefully maintaining emotional distance despite the way her heart raced at the possibility of a life where Alexander wasn't constantly one step ahead of imprisonment. The question hung between them, laden with implications for their undefined relationship. Alexander's answer came in the form of a question that revealed how profoundly his priorities had shifted. If I accept their terms, create a fully legitimate business, and leave behind the world my father built, would you and Emma consider a real future with me? He asked, vulnerability replacing his customary confidence. Natalie felt tears threatening as she recognized the magnitude of what he was proposing. Not just legal immunity, but personal redemption through the complete reinvention of his life's purpose. We would need honesty between us, she stipulated, taking her first step toward accepting the possibility. Complete transparency about your past and your plans. Alexander reached across the desk, taking her hand in a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. I've lived my entire life behind walls of deception, he acknowledged, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. But I think I'm ready to try something new. 6 months after Alexander signed the federal agreement, Natalie stood in the doorway of their new home, a spacious brownstone in a quieter neighborhood far from the penthouse's opulence and its shadows of the past. Emma raced through the rooms, exploring every corner of a space selected specifically for its proximity to good schools and parks, rather than strategic defensive positions. The last of the accounts has been transferred, Alexander announced, setting aside his laptop where he had been monitoring the final dissolution of his father's empire. The legitimate businesses had been reorganized under new management, while the shadowy operations had been systematically dismantled or handed to federal authorities as promised. Former associates regarded Alexander's transformation with reactions ranging from betrayal to admiration, some following his example toward legitimacy, while others distanced themselves entirely. The underworld whispered that Alexander Price had gone soft, but few dared say it to his face. Respect, once earned through fear, lingered even as his methods changed. Natalie had insisted on maintaining her independence throughout the transition, continuing her education to complete the nursing degree she had abandoned after Emma's birth. Alexander had supported this decision without hesitation, arranging his new consulting schedule around Emma's school hours, so one of them was always available for her. I received final confirmation today, Alexander mentioned casually over dinner, though the significance of his words belied his tone. The investigation is officially closed, all terms fulfilled. We're completely clear. The shadow that had loomed over their future had finally lifted, leaving room for possibilities that once seemed impossible. Emma flourished in their new reality, her natural intelligence nurtured by both the educational opportunities Alexander provided and the emotional security of a stable home. She had begun referring to him as Dad, without prompting or correction, the transition as natural as breathing for a child who recognized love regardless of its complicated origins. Natalie found unexpected fulfillment working in pediatric care, her experiences as a struggling single mother giving her unique insight into the challenges faced by many of her patients' families. The hospital administration discovered her talent for connecting with difficult cases, promoting her to a position coordinating care for underserved communities. Alexander's business acumen, applied to legitimate enterprises, proved equally effective. His consulting firm specialized in helping struggling businesses restructure and thrive, saving jobs while building a reputation far removed from his previous notoriety. The skills honed in the shadows translated surprisingly well to the boardroom's strategic challenges. The neighborhood children initially viewed Alexander with cautious curiosity, unsure what to make of the intense man who seemed to notice everything. Over time, he became known for coaching impromptu soccer games in the park and funding renovations for the community center, his natural leadership now channeled into community building rather than territory control. Natalie found Alexander one night in Emma's room, simply watching the child sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I keep waiting for this to feel temporary," he whispered when he noticed her in the doorway. "But instead, it feels more real than anything that came before." Their first holiday season as a family brought unexpected challenges as Alexander navigated traditions he'd never experienced growing up in his father's cold, calculated household. He approached Christmas with the same intensity he once devoted to business acquisitions, researching traditions and secretly ordering custom decorations that incorporated elements from Natalie's childhood memories. Peter, now head of security for Alexander's legitimate business ventures, remained a constant presence in their lives, though his role had transformed into that of a trusted friend, an occasional babysitter rather than enforcer. His transition mirrored Alexander's own, a man finding purpose in protection rather than intimidation, his loyalty now freely given rather than maintained through fear. "Do you ever miss it?" Natalie asked one evening, as they watched Emma practicing piano in the living room, her small fingers moving confidently across the keys. The question acknowledged the enormous power Alexander had willingly relinquished, the empire dismantled for the chance at a normal life. His answer came after thoughtful consideration, his arm tightening slightly around Natalie's shoulders. "I miss the certainty sometimes," he admitted, watching Emma with obvious pride. "But I've traded fear for respect, control for connection, and found something worth far more than power." Their wedding was a small affair in the Brownstones' garden, attended only by trusted friends who had weathered the transformation alongside them. Emma served as flower girl, beaming with importance as she scattered petals along the makeshift aisle where Natalie walked toward a future once unimaginable. "From this day forward," Alexander promised in his vows, his voice steady with conviction rather than the calculated confidence of his past, "I choose to measure my wealth not in territories controlled or rivals defeated, but in moments shared and trust earned." The challenges hadn't disappeared entirely. Occasional ghosts from Alexander's past required addressing, and integrating into normal society, after years in its shadows, presented unexpected difficulties. Yet they faced these obstacles together, their unique journey having forged a resilience that conventional relationships rarely developed. Natalie sometimes reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a simple act of kindness toward an injured stranger on a New York street. Her decision to help someone in need, at great personal cost, had ultimately transformed not just her life, but the lives of countless others affected by Alexander's systematic reformation. Their story became one of redemption rather than revenge, of choosing growth over power, and finding strength in vulnerability rather than isolation. Alexander, once feared throughout New York's underworld, found greater satisfaction in Emma's admiration than he ever had in his rival's terror, a transformation more profound than any business deal he had orchestrated. The final photograph placed in their family album showed the three of them on the brownstone steps, Alexander's arm around Natalie's waist, Emma laughing between them as autumn leaves swirled around their feet. It captured not just a family, but a testament to the possibility of change when love becomes more valuable than power. Thank you all for watching this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is important for me to continue creating content for you.